3:47 a.m. in the emergency room is when the world feels most fragile, when life and death decisions happen in fluorescent-lit hallways. Ronald Martinez had cleaned these floors for 15 years, but he'd never found anything like what waited for him that Tuesday night. As he sat across from Jimmy Fallon in the Tonight Show studio, his weathered hands still carried the muscle memory of that moment when everything changed, when a routine night shift became the most important discovery of his life. Ronald Martinez, 52, adjusted his tie nervously as the studio lights warmed his face. He wasn't used to being the center of attention. For the past 15 years, he'd been invisible, the man who appeared after visiting hours to restore order to the chaos of Cook County Hospital's emergency department. Tonight, he was here because a local news story about his retirement had gone viral, specifically the part about why he'd kept the same shift for over a decade. "So, Ronald," Jimmy said, leaning forward with genuine interest, 15 years of night shifts in an emergency room. That's got to give you some stories. What's the weirdest thing you've ever had to clean up?" Ronald's face lit up with a smile that transformed his tired features. "Oh man, Jimmy, you wouldn't believe some of the things people bring to the ER. I once found a full Thanksgiving turkey in the men's bathroom. Turned out this guy had gotten into a fight with his mother-in-law and decided to save the turkey by bringing it to the hospital." The audience erupted in laughter, and Jimmy shook his head in amazement. "A turkey? In the bathroom? How do you even approach that cleanup?" "Very carefully," Ronald chuckled, his nervous energy beginning to fade. "You learn not to ask too many questions in the ER. People do strange things when they're scared or in pain. My job was just to make sure everything was clean and safe for the next person who needed help." Jimmy's expression grew more serious. "That's got to be emotionally difficult, though, seeing people at their most vulnerable, dealing with trauma every night." Ronald nodded thoughtfully. "It is, but you also see incredible things. You see doctors and nurses performing miracles, families coming together, people showing up for each other when it matters most. I may have been there to clean, but I was also witnessing humanity at its best and worst, sometimes in the same shift." "What kept you on the night shift for so long?" "Most people would want to switch to days eventually." Ronald's hands stilled on his lap, and something in his expression shifted. "Well, that's actually a long story. You see, the night shift is when the hospital is most quiet, when you can really pay attention to things that might get missed during the day." Jimmy sensed there was more to this answer. "What kind of things?" Ronald looked down at his hands, then back up at Jimmy. "Can I tell you about something that happened? Something that changed my entire perspective on what my job really was?" Behind the cameras, producers felt the familiar shift that signaled an interview was about to go deeper than planned. But Jimmy, without hesitation, nodded. "Of course, Ronald, whatever you want to share." Ronald took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a story that had been carefully held for years. It was October 15th, 2018, Tuesday night, about 3:47 a.m. The ER had been crazy busy earlier. 3 car accidents, a heart attack, the usual chaos. But by the time I started my rounds, it had quieted down. The studio audience was attentive, sensing they were about to hear something significant. I was working my way through the supply rooms, restocking, cleaning, making sure everything was ready for the morning shift. When I got to supply room C, which is kind of tucked away in a corner near the back entrance, I heard something that stopped me cold. Jimmy found himself leaning forward. "What did you hear?" "Crying," Ronald said simply. "But not adult crying, baby crying, soft, weak crying, like..." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "Like someone very small and very scared." The studio was completely silent now, everyone understanding that they were witnessing something profound. I thought maybe I was hearing things. It was late, I was tired, and sometimes the ventilation system makes weird noises. But I stopped and listened, really listened, and there it was again. So I opened the supply room door, and there, on the floor behind a stack of towels, was a cardboard box. Jimmy's expression had shifted completely. This wasn't entertainment anymore. And in that box was a baby. Couldn't have been more than a few hours old. Still had the umbilical cord, wrapped in what looked like someone's t-shirt. The smallest, most fragile thing I'd ever seen. The audience was so quiet you could hear the hum of the studio lights. "What did you do?" Jimmy asked softly. Ronald's eyes filled with tears. First thing I did was panic. I mean, I'm a janitor, not a doctor. I don't know anything about babies or medical emergencies. But then I looked at this tiny person, and I realized that panic wasn't going to help either of us. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. So I picked up the box very carefully, and I took the baby to the nurse's station. But here's the thing. It was shift change. The night nurses were giving report to the day staff, and everyone was busy. The baby was stable, breathing okay, but clearly needed attention. Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, driven by an instinct that had nothing to do with television and everything to do with human connection. He walked around and sat on the edge of his desk, eliminating the barrier between them. "Ronald, you saved that baby's life." "Maybe," Ronald said, his voice thick with emotion. "But that's not the part that changed everything for me. The part that changed everything happened over the next 6 hours." Jimmy waited, giving Ronald space to continue. The doctors and nurses took over, of course. They did all the medical stuff, contacted social services, started the process of figuring out what would happen next. But I couldn't leave. I kept finding reasons to stay in that area, to check on things, to make sure. His voice trailed off, and he looked directly at Jimmy. "Jimmy, I sat with that baby for 6 hours. Just sat there, talking quietly, making sure someone was present while all the official stuff was happening. And somewhere around hour 4, it hit me." "What hit you?" "That baby had been left there intentionally, in that specific supply room, at that specific time, when that specific person would find them. Someone knew my schedule. Someone knew I'd be the one to open that door." The audience was crying now, understanding the profound implication of what Ronald was saying. "Someone trusted you," Jimmy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Someone trusted me," Ronald confirmed. "Someone in the most desperate situation of their life, making the hardest decision they'd ever have to make, chose to leave their baby where they knew I would find them. Me. The janitor who nobody notices, who works in the shadows, who just cleans up and moves on." Jimmy slid off his desk and walked over to Ronald's chair. Without ceremony, without asking permission, he knelt down beside him. "Ronald, you weren't just a janitor that night. You were exactly who that baby needed you to be." "That's when I understood," Ronald continued, tears flowing freely now. "My job wasn't just about cleaning. It was about being present, about paying attention, about being someone that people could count on to care, even when nobody was watching." Jimmy looked up at Ronald with profound respect. "Did you ever find out what happened to the baby?" Ronald smiled through his tears. "That's the best part of the story. The baby, it was a little girl. She was adopted by a wonderful family, the Johnsons. Dr. Sarah Johnson, actually, one of the ER doctors who was there that night, and her husband, Mark." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photo. "This is Emma Johnson. She's 6 years old now, healthy, happy, brilliant. And every year on her birthday, the Johnsons bring her to visit me at the hospital." Jimmy looked at the photo, then back at Ronald. "She knows you're the one who found her?" "She calls me her first friend," Ronald said, his voice breaking. "Last year, she drew me a picture of a superhero janitor with a cape made of cleaning rags. Said it was me, saving babies in the middle of the night." The audience rose to their feet, not in orchestrated applause, but in spontaneous recognition of something sacred. They weren't clapping for entertainment. They were bearing witness to love in its purest form. Jimmy stood up and turned to face the audience and cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, we throw around the word hero pretty casually in our society. But Ronald Martinez, he's the real thing. He's someone who understood that his greatest job wasn't cleaning floors or emptying trash. It was being present when someone needed him most." He turned back to Ronald. "You said someone trusted you with their most precious thing, but what you gave that family, what you gave Emma, goes beyond finding her. You gave her a story of being wanted, of being placed somewhere safe, of being discovered by someone who cared." Ronald wiped his tears and looked directly into the camera. "There are people out there right now working jobs that seem invisible, that seem unimportant. Janitors, security guards, cleaning staff, maintenance workers. But I want them to know that what we do matters, that being present matters, that paying attention matters, because you never know when you're going to find something or someone who needs you to care." Jimmy reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card, but this gesture felt different from all the others. It felt like a recognition between two people who understood service. "Ronald, I want you to have this. Not because you're a guest, but because you're someone who understands what it means to be truly present for others." Ronald took the card with hands that had spent years caring for a hospital, caring for the spaces where healing happened. "You know what I learned that night, Jimmy? I learned that the most important discoveries happen when you're not looking for them. When you're just doing your job with love, paying attention with your heart." The show ended differently that night. No desk pieces, no games, no comedy segments. Just Jimmy and Ronald talking about presence, about the profound impact of caring for the spaces where other people exist, about how the most ordinary moments can become extraordinary when touched by love and attention. 3 months later, Emma Johnson appeared on The Tonight Show with Ronald and her adoptive parents. She presented Jimmy with her own drawing, a stick figure of him sitting next to a stick figure of Ronald, both of them surrounded by hearts. The caption, in careful 6-year-old handwriting, read, "People who care about people." The episode became one of the most watched Tonight Show segments in history, not because it was funny, but because it reminded viewers that heroism exists in the most ordinary places, performed by people who show up every day to do work that seems invisible but is actually essential. Ronald continued working the night shift until his retirement 6 months later. On his last day, the hospital named Supply Room C the Ronald Martinez Family Room, a quiet space where people could sit with loved ones during difficult times. The plaque outside reads, "In honor of someone who understood that caring is the most important job of all." Emma still visits Ronald, now at his home, every birthday, and every year she asks him to tell her the story of the night they first met, the night when a janitor became a hero simply by being exactly where he was supposed to be, exactly when someone needed him most. Jimmy learned something that night that changed his entire approach to late-night television, that the most powerful stories aren't always the ones that make people laugh. Sometimes they're the ones that remind us that ordinary people doing ordinary jobs with extraordinary love are the real foundation of our society. The Tonight Show continued to entertain millions, but now it also served as a platform for recognizing the invisible heroes among us, the people who show up every day to care for the spaces and the people that the rest of us take for granted. Jimmy started a monthly segment called The Night Shift Heroes, featuring stories of people who work while the world sleeps, who tend to the essential but unseen work that keeps society functioning. Ronald's story inspired countless others to come forward with their own tales of midnight discoveries, of being present when it mattered most, of finding purpose in work that others might dismiss as menial. Hospital workers shared stories of small acts of kindness that saved lives. Security guards talked about the lonely people they checked on during their rounds. Cleaning staff revealed the moments when their attention to detail prevented disasters. The ripple effect was extraordinary. Hospitals began recognizing night shift workers with Ronald Martinez Awards for exceptional care. Janitors started getting thank you notes from families touched by their quiet presence. Emma Johnson, now 7, still draws superhero pictures, but they all wear cleaning uniforms. "Real heroes take care of people when nobody's watching," she tells everyone proudly. Because Ronald Martinez taught Jimmy Fallon and millions of viewers that presence is a gift, that attention is a form of love, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be exactly where you are, ready to discover what needs discovering, ready to care for what needs caring for. That's not just janitorial work. That's sacred work. That's what it looks like when someone understands that every space they tend, every person they encounter, every moment they're present, is an opportunity to make the world a little more safe, a little more clean, a little more ready for the miracles that happen when people show up for each other. The mop bucket still sits in Ronald's garage, retired but not forgotten. Sometimes Emma helps him clean it, and he tells her stories about the night shift, about the importance of paying attention, about how love shows up in the most unexpected places when you're ready to see it. That's the real discovery. Not that a baby was found, but that love was always there, waiting in the quiet spaces between chaos, tended by people who understand that caring is not just a job, but a calling. That 3:47 a.m. is not just a time on the clock, but a moment when the world holds its breath and waits for someone to notice what others have missed, to care for what others have forgotten, to discover what was always meant to be found. Sometimes the most important work happens when no one is watching, in the corridors between drama, in the moments between emergencies. Sometimes a janitor's mop bucket contains more than cleaning supplies. It contains the tools for changing lives, for being present when presence matters most, for discovering that the ordinary work of caring is actually the most extraordinary calling of all.